College tournament season in the college basketball world rolls on, and we have got a jam packed Friday of college basketball to unpack here on this episode. We have got both early and main slates of games to break down. So whether you are playing DFS, whether you are betting player props, whether you are just make straight up making bets on these games, we are going to break down both of the two games on the DraftKings early slate tomorrow, as well as the five games on the DraftKings main slate tomorrow. Tell you what you can expect from each game. Tell you who you need to have in and out of your DFS lineups, and some stats to consider for player props and bets here on this episode. Now, with it being conference tournament season, with it being the month of March, we're going to have a ton of content coming your way for the next few weeks. So make sure you are subscribed to the channels. That way you can get notified when all those new episodes drop. And also, make sure you go check out on the channel feed. Underdog is releasing new college basketball best ball drafts for the NCAA tournament. We have a strategy video as well as a live draft where we broke that format down, told you everything you need to know about the format and how to win at that format, and then did a live draft on the video. So if you're interested in that, check out the video, and also make sure you use our promo code on Underdog so that way you get that first deposit matched and double the amount of money that you can use to draft. But like I said, it's a jam-packed Friday, y'all. So let's go ahead and start breaking it down. We are going to dive into the early slate first. Now, I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed in DraftKings that this is only a two-game early slate. Like, if I'm being completely honest, I really thought that they were going to include the Big South games that were on the early slate for Friday. Like, we could have gotten High Point in because it's quite likely, if we're being honest, the High Point's going to be in the NCAA tournament in 2 weeks. So getting them here on a DraftKings slate would have been kind of nice. But anyway, we got a two-game Arch Madness slate with the two Missouri Valley tournament games. If you played the early slate on Thursday, the winning scores were insane because we had two really up-tempo games and some really bad defensive play on that slate, which allowed a lot of players to score a lot of fantasy points, and they were very reasonably priced on that slate. So you could kind of play whoever you wanted, and you could kind of score as many points as you wanted on that slate. It was crazy. I would expect that here on this slate, and reason number one is because this game, Southern Illinois versus Drake, is tipping us off at 1 p.m. KenPom has this one projected to be Drake 70-61. That is a 131-point game total. That is criminally low. This is a rematch of a game earlier in the season where Drake won 75-65, so that only had a 140-point total. In that game, Drake Bennett Sturts had 30, and Banks had 20. And for Southern Illinois, Davis and Dibba both had 20. Now, from a statistical perspective, we broke down this Southern Illinois Salukis team yesterday. They rank 138th in tempo, 202nd in defensive efficiency. They lose the turnover margin often. They turn it over a lot. They don't force a lot of turnovers, and they're a very poor three-point defense outside the top one or top 300 to be exact. Drake, on the other hand, they are looking to slow this game down. They rank 364th in the nation in tempo, but they do rank 59th in defense efficiency. So you're getting a slow-paced game against Drake with not a whole lot of action because they're a good defense. Drake's also a team that they give up a lot of turnovers, and they are an elite rebounding team. So it's kind of like there's not really a statistical edge to be had for Drake. The one good news is with Drake is they play virtually no bench. They rank 329th in bench minutes. They really just play one key guy off the bench, and so they do have a very short rotation. That is the good news. Now let's go ahead and break down Southern Illinois. So they are priced up a little bit from their prices on the Thursday slate. Yeah, that tends to happen after you score about 90 points in a game and everybody goes off. They have a very clear big three of Kennard Davis, Ali Dibba, and Jarrett Hensley. Those three guys are going to play pretty much every minute they can handle as long as they can stay out of foul trouble. I think that they make for great plays, if I'm being honest. And really, we talked about here on the Thursday slate how Dibba was price lower than Davis, even though their usage rates, peripheral rates were all quite similar. Well, they both ended up going off in that game. Davis had 42. Dibba ended up with 45. Dibba is still $1,000 cheaper than Davis. So honestly, I think, the contrarian thing to do would probably be to play Davis and not Dibba. I think there were a lot of people on the Thursday slate that played both and were quite content when they played both because of how good they both played. But I do think that both of them are in play. Given how similar the rates are, how similar the track record is, Dibba for $1,000 cheaper is much on paper the better play. Now, Hensley is the third piece of that big three. He is a big man. He is prone to getting in foul trouble. That first game against Drake, he fouled out in 10 minutes and only put up 3.25 DraftKings points. Yeah, that ain't gonna cut it. If he does get in foul trouble, Alibe and Moreno are the bigs that play off the bench. Alibe was really efficient today against Indiana State. He only played 7 minutes, but put up 12 DraftKings points in those 7 minutes. That's a pretty solid rate. He was effective when he was in there. I kind of wished he would have played more in that second half. Now, the other guy you got to know for Southern Illinois is Drew Steffi. He's a wing who puts up a lot of peripheral stats and plays every minute. Now, granted, I much would rather have a guy that puts up peripheral stats in a game that's going to be up tempo. Against Drake, this is not going to be up tempo, so I'm not the biggest fan of him here on this slate, but he is a guy that's going to be out there on the floor. Now, one of the biggest things that came from the Southern Illinois Indiana State game was that starting guard Damian Mayo Jr. only played 13 minutes. He did not play well, and he ceded a lot of minutes to Davion Sykes. Sykes is only $4,000 on DraftKings, back-to-back games of 18 fantasy points or more. I think he very much makes a lot of sense on paper to be a solid value play here in this game. Now, on the Drake side, oh boy, they play a very short rotation. That's the good news. Their starters are Jackson, Sturts, Mascari, Abreu, and Menyawu. Those are their 5 starters. Off the bench, Banks and Howard are the only 2 that play, but those 2 have been playing like virtually starters minutes because basically what happens is Sturts, Mascari, and Abreu play the entire game. And then Banks and Howard are going to come off the bench, and they play more minutes than Menyawu and Jackson. Hope you got all that. Bennett Sturts is their best player. He is their highest usage player as well. He's a great option at $8,900. If you play cash games in DFS, he's got to be in your lineups. He's just super steady, super consistent. And you know he's going to be out there on the floor. You know he's going to have the ball in his hands. Against Southern Illinois, he put up 44.5 DraftKings points earlier in the season. This is a pace-up spot for Drake, so this is a really good spot to play the Drake guys, in my opinion, and Sturts is the number 1 on that list. Now, Tavion Banks is second on DraftKings pricing. Like I said, he does come off the bench. I generally struggle with playing guys who come off the bench like at this price tag, but he's really good. And he's off of 3 straight games of 25 DraftKings points or more, playing 27 minutes or more in all those games. Super high usage player when he's in there. I kind of get it. It's $6,200. In the previous game against Southern Illinois, 37 DraftKings points in 26 minutes. Yeah, on paper, he makes a lot of sense, especially with that dual eligibility. He's very easy to fit into lineups. Abreu is the other guy that's going to play nearly every minute. Not my favorite play, though. He's not a high usage player, but you know he's going to be out there on the floor. And with it being a pace up spot, there is a chance he puts up a lot of DraftKings points. Previous game against SIU, 23.5. Now, with SIU being a very poor 3-point defense, Mascari is a guy who could make them play. He is Drake's highest volume 3-point shooter. The last game against SIU, he took 5 of them, put up 11 DraftKings points. I think he's overpriced. If he were like 4,800, I'd be all over him. But at 5,600, I'm kind of shying away from that one. And then I will talk about Isaiah Howard. He's playing more and more off the bench. Back-to-back games of 25 DraftKings points or more, $4,300. He's not a bad value play. I would not pair him with Isaiah Jackson though, because like I said, those 2 are kind of competing for minutes, and Howard has been playing in favor of Jackson in recent games. All right, now this next game is much more stackable. That is the good news. We've got Illinois State taking on Belmont. KenPom has this one projected to be Belmont 82-81. That is a game total of 163 points. That is 32 points higher than the other game, Southern Illinois and Drake. This is a rematch of the meeting where the 2 teams played earlier this season. It was 81-78 in favor of Illinois State. For Belmont, Pierre had 27. For Illinois State, Kinziger and Walker both had 22. Now, we broke down this Illinois State team yesterday, but we'll recap it. They ranked 279th in tempo, 245th in defensive efficiency. They are a very poor field goal defense. When you get shots off against them, it's very likely they go in. On the Belmont side, Belmont is a big-time pace-up for Illinois State. They rank 37th in tempo and 254th in defensive efficiency. They are also a very poor field goal defense. It's literally like the real life version of the Spider-Man meme, looking at each other with how poor they both play in terms of a field goal defensive perspective. So when you get shots off against these 2 teams, they tend to go in. With Belmont pushing the pace, there should be a lot of shots going up. Illinois State's starting 5 is unchanged from yesterday. Kinziger, Banks, Davis, Doherty, and Walker. Kinziger and Banks are going to play the most minutes. Walker is going to be the highest usage player. Landon Wolf started most of the year, but he was kind of a non-factor today as well. 13 DraftKings points, but that ain't going to cut it at his salary. Banks and Walker were the 2 that really shined today. Dalton Banks played 28 minutes against Missouri State, had over a 30% usage rate, 32 DraftKings points for him in that game. This game got a little out of hand, and Illinois State was able to rest their starters a little bit. So I do think that minute total and that fantasy point total would have been better for Banks if he did play the full load. Same goes for Chase Walker. He was great in that game, 25 minutes, 29 DraftKings points, huge usage rate. And we can expect that for him again here in this one. Kinziger was on pace to have a really, really good game, but I kind of think they let their foot off the gas. He really wasn't used a whole lot in the second half. $7,200 though. I really do think this big three of Illinois State is all very much in play, given that I think you can expect them to play more minutes, and I think you can expect just a full workload out of them now that they're playing a team that's actually competent on the other side. In terms of value plays from this side, I'm not super interested in any of them. Jordan Davis played about half the game today. Jack Doherty played 13 minutes today. Like, there's just not a whole lot for them outside of that big three of Banks, Kinziger, and Walker, which unfortunately kind of makes them hard to target because this is the game that you're going to want to target, right? This is the game where you're going to want to get all your players from, but Illinois State does not have a whole lot of value that looks all that appealing. On the Belmont side, this is a new team for us, I think. I don't think we've seen this team on the DraftKings slate this year. If they have, it was forgettable. But they're back here today. Their starters are Witt, Walker, Lundblade, Pierre, and Rogers. Off the bench, they will play Noyes, Peebles, and Orme. Peebles is a little bit interesting. He's a super high usage player when he comes in, very volatile. Would not shock me if he had a good game, but there's certainly no like modicum of consistency except for the fact that when he comes in, he has the ball in his hands a lot and he takes a decent amount of shots. Sam Orme is actually like a bench player in name only. He very much splits minutes with the starting center. Rogers, I can't think of his first name, Brigham Rogers. So they're pretty much split minutes. Don't play both of them together. Orme is actually a much higher usage player, has better rates, but Rogers does tend to play a little bit more minutes. That's why Rogers gets a little bit of a bump in price. But Orme actually scored more DraftKings points on the season. Now let's talk about this team's best players. So Pierre and Witt are their two best players. They lead in usage. Pierre is a guy who can absolutely fill up a stat sheet, and this is a game where I look for Belmont to absolutely fill up the stat sheet, right? Just with how bad Illinois State is on defense, you're going to see a lot of buckets scored from Belmont, and Jonathan Pierre is going to have his hands in a lot of them. I think he's a really solid play, $8,300. I feel the same way about Carter Witt. He is a Furman transfer who was quite good there, has NCAA tournament experience, and in two of his last three games, he's been 39 DraftKings points or more. That's pretty good. That's really good, in fact. In the previous meeting against Illinois State, he only put up 25, but very balanced stat lines, 6, 5, and 7. He was 3 for 12 from the field. I don't think he's going to go 3 for 12 again. I think he's going to shoot better than that. So I really do like Carter Witt. I really do like Jonathan Pierre at the top. And then Isaiah Walker's a guy we got to talk about. So he plays a ton of minutes, and he's generally an efficient player. He shoots it at a high percentage, but he generally doesn't get a whole lot of shot volume. He doesn't get a whole lot of rebounds, blocks, steals, assists. He generally doesn't get, well, rebounding is pretty good. He averages about 6 a game. Assists, blocks, and steals he's not so great at, though. But he plays a ton of minutes. He's out there all the time. In a game that we expect to see a lot of points scored, sometimes just having a guy who's out there on the floor is worthwhile looking into. But like I said, the part that's kind of disappointing about this game is that the game total is so high, and you're going to almost certainly want to stack this game, but it's really tough to stack this game when the value plays are so bad because both the teams have short rotations or DraftKings just kind of price you out of playing some of the bench guys. All right, but that does it for the early slate. Before we move on over to the main slate, I do want to remind you there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me. It's where we also tweet out all updates for the show, as well as if there's ever a slate where I don't have a show, I try to get my thoughts and opinions and my data out there as well. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Every single day, myself and a lot of other DFS players who are really smart and really good, they are in there talking lineups, talking strategies, updating injury news, updating starting lineups, just bouncing ideas off each other. The college basketball chat in there is a blast to be a part of. We got other sports covered as well, but the college basketball one has been really jumping lately. So if you're looking for people to talk college basketball DFS with who know what they're doing, who can bring you some good insight and just be there to bounce ideas off of you and sweat it out together, we have a blast in there, and I cannot recommend joining that community enough. Also, If you want to know who actually makes all of my DFS lineups, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I write an article for every single college basketball DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as why they are my core plays. So if you are interested in knowing that, that would be a way you could get access to that. Now, I cannot just promise that you can just plug those plays into your lineup and print off thousands of dollars. It's not that easy, but I can promise that you can get well researched, well thought out takes from somebody who knows college basketball and puts in their homework on this stuff. All right. Now, let's go ahead and dive into the 5-game main slate. This is a fun one. I actually really like this main slate. So, we were joking in the Fantasy Corner Discord last week about how the Friday night slate seems to always have Dayton or VCU on it. And last week, we didn't have Dayton or VCU, and it kind of felt a little empty. Well, guess what? We get Dayton versus VCU on this one. You know, ESPN loves these Friday night A10 games, and this matchup always seems to be played on Friday night, always seems to be on the Friday night slate. So we do have a matchup between Dayton and VCU. In my opinion, the two best programs in the Atlantic 10. Always a good matchup when they play. KenPom has this one projected to be VCU 77-67. That is a total of 144 points. Now, what's interesting is these two teams played earlier in the season at UD Arena. Dayton kind of let it slip away. They should have won that game, in my opinion. They kind of commanded it the whole way, and VCU really surged ahead in the final minutes. VCU won 71-68. That is 139 points scored. And looking at the history these two teams played, because I really thought that, you know, when these two teams play, there's low totals. Yeah, there are. That 139-point total was the second highest scoring Dayton VCU game in the last 3 seasons, and that includes 6 matchups because there was one year where they played 3 times because they played in the A10 tournament. And the other game that was higher than that one went to overtime. So don't get your hopes up that this is going to be some kind of high-scoring, high-flying game. When these two teams play, they play rock fights. In that game earlier this season, Shulga and Jackson for VCU both had over 15. For Dayton, Nate Santos had 18, and Javon Bennett had 16 real points. Now, from a statistical perspective, here's why you can expect this game to be ugly. Dayton ranks 276th in tempo, 137th in defensive efficiency. They play with a very high assist rate, but they're a very poor 2-point defense. But the good news is they don't let you take a whole lot of 2-point shots. They really pack the paint and force a lot of threes. But if you're willing to take the 2-point shots and get all the way to the rim, you can have your way there. VCU ranks 231st in tempo and 19th in defensive efficiency. The one thing that stands out with VCU is they foul a lot. And I'll be honest, if you watch VCU play, they probably foul even more than it gets called. They kind of play super physical. They dare the refs to call fouls, and there's some games where the refs do call everything, and they're in trouble. Now, let's talk about this Dayton team. So, Dayton, I'll admit I'm a little biased. My dad went to the University of Dayton. We went earlier this season to the Dayton Loyola game. It was a blast. Seeing games played at UD Arena is a blast. It's a town that very much cares about their basketball team. It's really a cool program to follow, and you know, I know a little bit about them, but I'm a little bit biased. I'll admit it. To me, Dayton is the most talented team in the Atlantic 10. To me, when you look at what they were able to do early in the season at Maui, you know, beating Marquette, they look like an NCAA tournament team. And in A10 conference play, they just haven't been locked in on a nightly basis. And I think if they lock in, I think they're better than this VCU team. But they haven't shown the ability to do it consistently. So I kind of like the idea of betting them on the money line, not as a parlay, just kind of on its own, because I do think that there's a likelihood that they could pull it off, but because they have the potential to, but it's not something that I feel super confident about. So I kind of like the odds on that, right? Now, let's go ahead and talk about Dayton. So Malachi Smith is their point guard. He is their usage leader, largely because he has an insane assist rate. And the last few games, he hasn't done a whole lot of fantasy scoring because the assists haven't been flowing. But he generally does everything else. He has the ball in his hands a ton. $5,900 is a very reasonable salary to pay for him on DraftKings. In the last VCU game, he only scored 12 fantasy points, but he was recovering from an illness in that game. He was not 100%. If he is 100%, he's going to probably play around 30 minutes. He's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. I think $5,900 is a very reasonable price to pay for Malachi Smith. Now, Santos and Cheeks are kind of the two wild cards. They're both wing players. They both have over 20% usage offensively. They're both wild rides for DFS purposes. You look at Enoch Cheeks, his recent game log, he has a 40 in there. He has a 15 and a 6 in there. He has a 47 and a 50 in there, right? Like he can do anything from a DraftKings scoring perspective because he's a very good scorer. He's a very good rebounding guard. He can rack up assists, blocks, and steals if the game gets going up and down. He's a very good defensive player. So I do think that this, if you're playing enough lineups, just play Enoch Cheeks in some of them because there's a chance he could absolutely go off and nuke the slate for you. I will stand by that. And that's kind of just how I feel about Enoch Cheeks. Massive ceiling, but a lot of risk. Nate Santos is kind of in a similar way, but without as high of a ceiling, with a slightly higher floor. He's a wing player. He's a forward, but he plays the forward. He's kind of a small ball forward. He's a good rebounder, but he doesn't give you a whole lot of assist, block, or steals. He's really dependent on scoring and rebounding. $6,800. If he were about $5,800, I'd be recommending him as a core play, but he's a little bit overpriced where he's at. But he does have the ceiling that he could win you a slate. After that, Javon Bennett's the kind of the fifth starter for this Dayton team. He was their starting point guard last year. Plays a ton of minutes. Stat lines can vary, but he's going to be out there on the floor a ton. Now, at the center position, Dayton has been splitting minutes between the Frenchman Emile Letang. You gotta say it with a French accent, not just Emile Letang. So Letang has been playing about 20 minutes. He plays about half the game. He's a very high usage player. When he's in there, he can very much rack up a lot of stats in a hurry. But the problem is he's not a good defensive player at all. Zed Key is. Zed Key is a good rim protector. Zed Key is a great rebounder. He is also a very high usage player when he's in there. And so these two guys have been pretty much splitting minutes 50-50. And you really kind of never really know who's going to be the one that scores the DraftKings points. Lately, they've had games where both of them have hit value. And if there were ever a time where Anthony Grant were to decide on one of them, or if the other one were to get in foul trouble, then you could see a ceiling game from one of the two of them. And I'm absolutely going to have both of them in my player pool because if there was a game where Zed Key were to play 30 minutes, he could break a slate. If there was a game where Letang would play 30 minutes, he could absolutely break a slate. So I'm going to be playing both of them for that reason. Posh Alexander comes off the bench. He's the transfer from Butler. Kind of been a little bit of a disappointment this year. He's a good fantasy points per minute player when he's out there, but he doesn't play a whole lot because he's behind Malachi Smith and Javon Bennett, who play all the time. Now, on the VCU side, there is one injury that you're going to need to know about, and that is Philip Russell. He sprained his ankle. Well, I shouldn't say sprain. He has an ankle injury that he only played 11 minutes in the Duquesne game. If he were out for this game, then I believe that would lead to more minutes from Zeb Jackson, and that is important for this reason. Zeb Jackson was great against Dayton. He exemplifies one of Dayton's weaknesses. Dayton does not defend big guards well at all. Zeb Jackson runs about 6'5". In that Dayton game, he was 2 for 11 from the field and put up 26 DraftKings points because they just had issues with it. They couldn't not foul him, and he's a good rebounder at the guard spot. He can get you some assists as well. I really like Zeb Jackson at $5,000. He's a core play for me if we get news that Philip Russell is out. Now, after that, Joe Bamastill's the next guy I'm going to talk about. He leads the team in usage rate, but the problem is that he's just a scorer. He does not do a whole lot with the peripheral stats, and he's not the type of guy I like targeting in DFS. If I'm paying $7,300 for a guy, then I need him to both be able to score the ball and be able to put up a lot of peripheral stats. And he only checks one of those boxes. He's not for me on this slate, in my opinion. Max Shulga, though, is. He's a guy who just churns out the peripheral stats. He's a great rebounder from the guard spot. He can get you a lot of assists as well. And oh, by the way, if Philip Russell was out, then Shulga's going to eat up a lot of that usage. And in the previous game against Dayton, he had 37 DraftKings points. He's another bigger guard. Dayton struggles with bigger guards. I kind of like the idea of getting to Shulga and or Jackson on this slate. Now, from there, Jack Clark plays a ton of minutes. He's really just a 3-and-D guy, not a big-time usage player, but when he's out there a ton, he can rack up stat lines when he's out there. $6,000, I think he's a great cash game play. I don't know if he's going to give you the ceiling to win a tournament on DraftKings, but he's going to be out there a ton. He's going to have a decent stat line. He's probably going to put up 23 fantasy points by the end of the night. After that, Bamgoy and Fermin split minutes at the center position. They're kind of in a similar boat to Key and Letang for Dayton, where they're both cheap. They have games where they both do hit value because they can have decent fantasy point per minute rates, but it's, to me, if you're going to play them, play one of them in a lineup, but have both of them in your player pool. That way, if one of them does go off, you're going to end up benefiting from it. Because like I said, Dayton, when they play Letang, there's not a whole lot of protection at the rim. So yeah, one of those guys could absolutely go off if they do see max minutes. All right, next up, we've got a fun game in the Big Ten, Purdue and Illinois. This one is the game you're going to want to target on the main slate. KenPom has it projected to be 80 to 78 in favor of Illinois. That is very interesting to me. KenPom loves Illinois still. The sports books do not. KenPom still does because KenPom understands the whole body of work. And really, Illinois had a really rough stretch when all their guys were sick and injured. And now they're kind of getting back healthy. Now they're kind of starting to play good basketball again. I kind of buy into the fact that I think KenPom might have that one right. I think Illinois probably should be favored to win this game, even though, on paper, Purdue looks like the better team when you look at their body of work. All right, now from the statistical perspective, Purdue ranks 297th in tempo, 51st in defensive efficiency. They are outside the top 300 in two-point field goal defense. Yeah, life ain't so sweet when you don't have Zach Edey waiting at the rim to block out the sun, because basically Purdue's guards are not great defenders, but before they could be not great defenders and just say, Zach's got it. He's waiting at the rim for him. Now that ain't happening. Guys are just getting to the rim and finishing. So not a good two-point defensive team, not a good rim protecting team. Illinois ranks 18th in tempo, 32nd in defensive efficiency. They shoot the three-point shot at a very high rate. They're generally not that good at shooting it. And they do not force a lot of turnovers, which is good news because if you're Purdue, it means you're going to get a lot of shots off, and Purdue tends to take good shots. Now, on the Purdue side, I got to be honest, I'm only playing two of them. I'm telling you right now, I'm only playing two of them. You can probably guess which two it is. It's Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn. Braden Smith is the do-it-all point guard who's a triple-double threat every time he touches the floor. With Illinois being a major pace-up spot, with Illinois being a team that's not going to force a whole lot of turnovers, Braden Smith is going to have a whole lot of opportunities to not only score, but get rebounds and assists, which is what he does best. I think he's by far the top overall play on the slate, and he's going to probably be a core play for me. Trey Kaufman-Renn is another guy I'm going to get to. He actually leads Purdue in usage as much as Braden Smith does. Kaufman-Renn's usage rate is actually higher because he doesn't play every single minute, but when he's out there, they are making it a point to get him the ball on the low block. He's a pretty good rebounder as well, and with this being a pace-up spot, more possessions equals more touches for my boy TKR. So I do think you can play Smith and TKR in the same lineup. I do think you can play one without the other. I'm probably going to be getting to Braden Smith more than TKR in my personal opinion, though. Fletcher Lawyer plays a ton of minutes. I think he's a game stack play. He tends to be hit or miss, and I mean that literally. When he's hitting his shots, he gives you good DraftKings performances. When he's not hitting his shots, he's just eh. If he were 5,600, not 6,600, I'd be all over him. But to me, he's a little expensive because if I want to stack this game, the Illinois guys are expensive. Smith and Kaufman-Renn are expensive. It's like I got to find value somewhere, and if Lawyer's not going to be that value, it makes it tough to play him. Now, the other two starters are C.J. Cox and Caleb First. First might be worth a dart throw. Plays a lot of minutes at a very cheap price, but not a high usage player. Colvin and Heidi come off the bench, but I'm not feeling that. On the Illinois side, they are a very interesting team. They've recently moved Will Riley into the starting lineup in favor of Ben Hummerkaus, and they now start Kylan Boswell, Kasparas Jakacionis, Trey White, Will Riley, and Tomislav Ivasic, a.k.a. Big T. Look, if his brother gets to be Big Z, I'm going to call him Big T. So let's talk about that starting five. So Will Riley has been really good since he's been the starting five, but the problem is now on DraftKings, he's straight up overpriced. His salary is $7,600. He has not had a game of 4x value in his last four, and those have been as a starter. Those have been as playing max minutes. It's just hard to advocate for him at that price tag. He's also a jump shooter. I kind of want guys that are going to play at the rim against this Purdue team. Kasparas Jakacionis is the do-it-all guy. He's kind of like their Braden Smith. I don't mind it. I don't think he's the best play in the world at 8,400. I'd prefer for him to be a little bit cheaper as well. Only one game of 4x value in his last four, but I don't mind it at $8,400. I would rather play Kylan Boswell at 6,900 though. You look at their last two bounce back wins after the slump they were on. It's been because Boswell's been playing max minutes. Boswell's had his usage rate go up. He's been getting boards. He's been getting assists. He's been scoring over 32 DraftKings points in each of the last two. I would rather play Boswell at cost than Kasparas Jakacionis at cost. Trey White is just kind of like this pit bull defender type of guy that had a huge game against Michigan. If he plays a lot of minutes, he has a chance to put up a lot of fantasy points, but the problem is now he's at 5,800. You really need about 24 from him, and really the only time he's done that in the last month was in that game against Michigan, so it's kind of hard to advocate for him. I do like Ivasic. I'm going to call him Big T. I do like Big T at 7,100 because, look, we know Purdue doesn't defend the paint well at all. Ivasic is going to operate there in the paint, and he's going to have the ball ball in his hands quite a lot. He just has to stay out of foul trouble, which he doesn't do all that often. But I think at $7,100, he gives you a ton of upside. He has a guy who can absolutely nuke the slate at his salary. All right, next up, we got game number 3. We've got South Florida taking on Memphis. This is an interesting one. This is in the AAC. I believe Memphis has locked up the regular season already, but they're playing for NCAA tournament seeding. They cannot afford to keep losing games if they want to have a nice draw. Ken Bum has this one as Memphis 82-65. That is a game total of 147 points. This is a rematch of a game played earlier in the season where Memphis won 80-65. That's 145 points scored. And Dane Danger led Memphis, and South Florida had 4 players in double digits scoring, but no players over 11 points. From a statistical perspective, South Florida ranks 125th in tempo, 160th in defensive efficiency, and they are a very poor rebounding team on both sides. Memphis ranks 37th in tempo and 37th in defensive efficiency, and they're a very poor defensive rebounding team. So let's talk about South Florida. This is a team that we have seen on the slate multiple times this season. They're kind of hard to get a read on, though, because their best player, in my opinion, is Jaden Reed. He's kind of like this little spark plug guard that comes off the bench and is a very high usage player. I just generally have a hard time paying $6,400 for a bench player, but he does play starters minutes. He does have starters usage, and he can actually rack up some stat lines. The previous game against Memphis, he had 27 DraftKings points. I don't mind him at $6,400. I was much more into playing him when he was at $5,200 2 weeks ago, though. Jameel Reynolds is South Florida's low post guy. He's pretty good. He's always been a good fantasy points per minute player in the course of his career. Now he's playing maximum minutes as a part of this South Florida rotation. In the previous game against Memphis, he got in a little bit of foul trouble, only played 29 minutes, still put up 21 DraftKings points. I don't mind the idea of going back to him, but again, I was much more into playing him when he was $6,000 on DraftKings as opposed to $8,100. This slate has a lot of guys that feels like they're just way up above their normal price, and he's one of them. Jaden Reed's one of them as well. Brandon Stroud is a guy that has been super boomer bust in the last 3 games. And I'll be honest, I haven't watched all the South Florida games. Sue me. But, I mean, the usage is actually trending good. He had a very high usage rate starting in the Texas San Antonio game when he put up 54 DraftKings points. Really high usage rate continued against North Texas. Against Temple, he fouled out in 60 minutes, but had another really high usage rate when he played. Against FAU, only played 27 minutes, was again dealing with foul trouble, was 1 for 10 from the field. But hey, the fact that they kept giving him the ball to shoot when he was already 1 for 8 and 1 for 9, like, the usage is there. And Memphis is an up-tempo team that's not the best defensive team on the planet. I kind of like Brandon Stroud as a GPP play because I do think that the usage is pointing in the right direction. I'll be honest, after that, it's really hard to advocate for anybody on South Florida. They're all like minutes will vary, usage will vary. They're boom bust. Kobe Knox at $5,200 feels about like the right price, but CJ Brown at $4,600, Jimmy Williams at $4,000. Like you're just hoping that they can hit value. Quincy Adamakoya at $3,800, same deal. Like you're just hoping and praying, but there's not a whole lot of consistency there to go off of. I think Knox would probably be the best out of that supporting cast that I would advocate for. Now on the Memphis side, they are run by their 2 guards, PJ Haggerty and Tyrese Hunter. But here's the thing, PJ Haggerty has not been great from a fantasy perspective lately. He's up at $9,400, which really means we want about 38 DraftKings points from him, which he has not put up in his last 7 games. I'm sorry, 6 games, last 6 games. Now, the usage has been there, the shots have been there, but it's just really asking a lot of him to get to 4x value and especially 5x value at his price tag of $9,400. He's a great player. In the previous meeting against South Florida, he only put up 31. I just think he's overpriced for what he's been doing lately. Dane Danger, on the other hand, is not. Dane Danger has been great recently. Last 4 games, 31, which is a little lower than we would want, 45, 49, 52. That's really solid. And against South Florida, he put up 32. He was 9 for 13 from the field in that game. They had no answer for him. So I think Dane Danger, high upside play, $8,700. Now, where you start getting into the nitty gritty of this slate is like comparing these high priced value plays. And again, I really do like Braden Smith. There's 2 guys in the later games that I like a ton as well. So I would probably have Danger on like that next little tier. Danger and Shulga are both going to make my player pool, but both probably not going to be huge parts of it. Now, after those key guys, Tyrese Hunter is their second guard that I mentioned earlier. Again, like PJ Haggerty, though, the performances just haven't been there to advocate for this price tag where he's currently at right now. Jourdain and Cisse are kind of the same way. Like Jourdain's been great recently, but he just feels way too expensive. Musa Cease, I said Cisse, it's Cease, same way. Like he's been good, but just the price tag feels a little too much. Colby Rogers is a guy that I like though. So Colby Rogers, if you do not remember him last year, he was the best player for Wichita State. And anytime you get a high usage player that transfers and is still playing a lot of minutes, then you know that that high usage player is still in there somewhere. And for Colby Rogers, he just shows it every now and then. Against UAB, he had 29 DraftKings points. So he's a guy that I get in the player pool often just because every now and then he does flash that ceiling and he does play a lot of minutes. All right, game number 4. We've got UNLV taking on New Mexico. This should be a fun one. I'll be honest, the Mountain West. So like last year, heading into the NCAA tournament, I was in this mode where like I thought New Mexico was like this sleeper team. I thought they were great. They lose in the first round. And when previously to that, I faded every other Mountain West team other than New Mexico. And I really think that this year I might go back to that same strategy of fading the Mountain West in the NCAA tournament. But they've played some fun games in the regular season. This could be one of them. Could be. Ken Palm has it projected to be 78-67 in favor of New Mexico. That's a game total of 145 points. It's a rematch of a game where New Mexico won 75-73. That's 148. Donovan Dent and Nelly Jr. Joseph combined for 56 of New Mexico's 75 points. DeDan Thomas led UNLV. More on him in a second. From a statistical perspective, UNLV ranks 268th in tempo, 59th in defensive efficiency. New Mexico is 4th in tempo, 23rd in defensive efficiency. So New Mexico, tough defensive team, but major pace-up spot for UNLV here in this one. And New Mexico does give up a high assist rate, so UNLV can expect some guys to pile up some assists in this one. Now, for UNLV, DeDan Thomas is their best player. He's out for this game. He's missed the last few games for them. And they've kind of had to shuffle the deck, figure out some different lineups. They've tried different combinations of a starting lineup while Thomas has been out. In their last game, they started Brooklyn Hicks, Julian Rishwain, Jalen Hill, Jamison Henley. No, it's not Jamison Henley. I'm sorry, Jaden Henley. Jamison Henley played at Minnesota a few years ago, and Jeremiah Cherry at the 5. The only true point guard left on the squad is Jalen Bedford. He came off the bench last game, but that didn't stop him from playing 30 minutes. It was kind of like a bench in name only where he played starters level minutes over Brooklyn Hicks. With the Dan Thomas being out, he is their true point guard. I kind of buy it at $6,100. I don't think that's a bad price point for him. But what you're seeing happen more and more as we get further and further along with DeDan Thomas being out is you're seeing higher usage rates for Julian Rishwain and Jaden Henley. Henley in the last game in particular was really good, 29 DraftKings points, but before that he had 2 big ones, 42 and 39. He's just seeing his usage rate go up and up without DeDan Thomas in the lineup. He can put up peripheral stats at a solid rate. He's really assisting the ball more now recently too. They're kind of using him as a little bit of a point forward type of deal. I really like him at $7,800. I think he's a great mid-tier, upper mid-tier pay-up option. Rishwain is another guy who's seeing his usage go up, 38 DraftKings points in their last game. I kind of don't mind taking shots at Henley and Rishwain. Even though they're a little bit pricey, I don't mind taking shots at them because this is a big-time pace-up game. This is a game that is very, very stackable in my opinion. All right, now let's talk about the New Mexico side. So on the New Mexico side, Donovan Dent was just outstanding in the previous game against UNLV. 34 real points, 37 DraftKings points. Now, he kind of has the same problem that PJ Haggerty does, where it's really asking a lot of him to get to 4x and 5x value at his salary as a guard who doesn't rebound a whole lot, obviously doesn't block any shots, but the usage is there, and he's shown us his ceiling, right? Like, he has these 4x and 5x games in the game log. I think he's got a ton of upside. I really do. But I don't think I don't know. I'd rather just play Braden Smith for $2,000 cheaper, if I'm being honest. But I do see the upside for Dent. I am going to try to make a lineup with him in it because I am going to build out a game stack of this game because I do think there's a chance it could take off. Nelly Jr. Joseph has been great this season for New Mexico. In the last game against UNLV, he put up 49 DraftKings points. That right there is enough to make me consider going back to him. He's also had 3 straight games over 13 rebounds. That's insane. So I want to go back to him. I think he's a great rebounder, and against UNLV, I think that plays. So $9,100, reasonable price tag for him. I'm buying it. Now, the rest of their starting five is True Washington, Mustafa Amzil, and Philip Borovikinen. True Washington is really the only other guard of the group. He's really up and down. He had a game where he dropped 25, 5, and 4 recently, 50 DraftKings points against Utah State. I don't see that happening here. I'd rather just pay up for Donovan Dent. Borovikinen and Amzil are both like kind of more power forwards, but like they play them both together. It's weird. And with both of them in the lineup, neither of them, like they've kind of canceled each other out. Umzil at $5,000 is a little more reasonable because he's been hurt, so DraftKings kind of pricing him down for that reason. But they kind of cancel each other out when they're both in the starting lineup. It's kind of a weird dynamic. CJ Nolan is their best guard that comes off the bench, but he's not playing enough minutes now to like really feel comfortable playing him. I think he's got some upside as a value play, but the minutes total has not been there recently. All right, let's talk about the last game, Colorado State at Boise State. KenPom has this one projected to be 74-69 in favor of Boise State. That is a game total of 143 points. Last time these two teams played, Colorado State actually won 75-72 on their home floor. In that game, Tyson Dagenhart and Alvaro Cardenas had big games for Boise. Nate Clifford of Colorado State had 27 and 7, and that is a total of, I can look it up, a total of 44 DraftKings points in that game. So let's go ahead and start there. Well, let's go over the stats first. Colorado State ranks 242nd in tempo, 60th in defensive efficiency. They're a very poor three-point defense. Boise State ranks 265th in tempo, 54th in defensive efficiency, and they don't generate a whole lot of blocks or steals. For Colorado State, this is a team we haven't seen on a DraftKings main slate in a long time. They've been on some of the late night slates, some of the kind of the peripheral slates on Saturdays. They've been on there, but haven't gotten a chance to talk about them on here in a long time. Their starting five is Evans, Lake, Clifford, Crocker Johnson, and Mbemba. Their best player is Nate Clifford, and he can fill up the stat sheet in just a variety of ways. And to me, he's up there with Braden Smith, like as the second best pay up option on this slate. You look at what he's done recently. He's shown a high floor. He hasn't been under 38 DraftKings points in his last 7 games. Multiple games of 50 in there, including, well, not including, but he does have a 44 against Boise State. He can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways. With Boise not being a team that's going to get a whole lot of blocks or steals, and Boise really with playing a weird starting lineup, they don't really have a natural matchup for him. I could see him having a really big game here in this one. Another guy that I like here is I really do like Kyan Evans. He is this team's second highest usage player, and he's had 3 of his last 4 games over 28 DraftKings points. DraftKings has him at $58 or $5,400. I think he's a very reasonable value play. I think he's probably going to be a popular value play, but I think he's very reasonable on a slate that doesn't have like a whole lot of very obvious value plays. After that, Lake plays a lot of minutes, but it's not at the same usage rate that Evans is. I'd rather play Evans instead for $200 cheaper. Mbemba is a guy that did not play the first game against Boise. So what's interesting about that is it led to a ton of minutes for Crocker Johnson. In that game against Boise, he played 29 minutes, which is one of his highs on the season, put up 27 DraftKings points, which is one of his best on the season. You could argue that they just need him anyway to combat Boise's size, because Boise does play with pretty much 3 bigs in their starting lineup. But it's easy to just say, well, Memba was out. Of course they needed him because they didn't have the bigs, right? So I think Crocker Johnson's a player that does have a huge ceiling on this slate, because what if he does play 29 minutes again? Then it's quite likely he's going to get 4x and 5x value at that salary of $4,900. Ethan Morton is kind of a wing that comes off the bench for them. They will also play Bowen Bourne and Keyshawn Williams, but I'm not super interested in those guys. Like, y'all, I'm telling you, this slate, it's really tough because there's a lot of guys at the top that you want to play, but there's not a whole lot of super obvious value plays in the 4 and 5K range, or even 3K range. There's just not. Now, on the Boise side, let's go ahead and talk about them. Last team of the night. So their starters are Cardenas, Carmichael, Meadow, Dagenhart, and Stanley. I'm sorry, not Stanley, Ubo. Ubo starts over Stanley, but really he does not play starter level minutes. Stanley comes off the bench and plays more minutes at the 5 spot than Ubo does. I think Stanley's a high upside value play at $4,500. Anyway, Talking about the stars for Boise, Cardenas and Degenhart are their two best players. It's quite likely that the two of them had good games in this one against Colorado State. Cardenas in the last game had 39 DraftKings points against them. Degenhart in the last game against them had 32. They're both really good. I kind of see no problem in playing them. I think they're very good points per dollar plays for where they're at, and I think that they're very good game stacking plays for this one. Now, Andrew Meadow, he's kind of like a big man that plays the three. He's also a very odd looking guy. You should watch this game if you don't know what I'm talking about. He's been really good lately, but I just don't know. I don't think he's a natural fit against this Colorado State team and what they do. In the last game they played, he played 32 minutes and only put up 12 DraftKings points. I would rather play rather than Meadow, I would rather play Carmichael. So this is a value play that I actually really like. He's a freshman who hasn't played the full season. He has recently moved into the starting lineup, and it's been hit or miss. But when he hits, it's like slate breaking upside. 3 of the last 5 have been over 19 DraftKings points, with one of them being 29, one of them being 24. At a price tag of $4,200, that's like 6x and 7x value. So when he does hit, he hits hard. And so I really like him for that reason. I think he's more of a GPP type play than cash game type play, but now that he's in the starting lineup, he is giving you a lot of boom or bust potential. After that, Buchanan, Keene will both play off the bench, but I can't really advocate for them. Like I said, the value on this slate's really tough because a lot of these teams play their starters, and their starters are all priced up. But all right, y'all, that is going to do it for this episode. Hopefully, we gave you guys all the information you need in order to build some winning DraftKings lineups for this slate. Remember, if you do want more from me, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. You can join the Fantasy Corner Discord, or you could also check out the Patreon for the core plays. But that is going to do it for this episode, y'all. Hopefully, we gave you guys all the goods. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. I cannot stress that enough. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm really looking forward to this Friday, full Friday of watching college basketball. The whole next week is going to be like this, so we're going to have a ton of content, so make sure you're subscribed, so that way you can be with us for the rest of college basketball season. But we are going to go ahead and roll on out of here. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll be back tomorrow night and pretty much every night after that. But thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.